Hi folks. I thought I would do a video about my car ownership so far, just to give a little bit more insight into myself. Um, this channel, I'm hoping that is going to be more of a bloggy, slight instructional video, but only when I'm conducting work on my Focus. Um, at the moment, that's just where I'm going. I'm not hoping to like expand the channel or monetize it in any way. I'm literally making the videos that I would like to make. I am a active member on the Ford Focus Mk1 98 to 2005 Facebook group. Some of you may, if I think if we've got viewers or subscribers who are known to that group, you may know who I am. um, I am on there and I actively put some posts up about what I've done on my car, any tips that I can offer. I have been a member on that Facebook group since virtually when it started in 2014, when these cars were just literally cheap bangers, and definitely banger racers at the end of their life, and they still are to some extent. Um, I bought my Focus in 2013. It's my first car. Um, I did pass my test on a manual license, but obviously the Focus I've got is an automatic. I only bought it because of the price it was at for the mileage. It was almost an 11-year-old car at the time, being an O2 plate. Um, and it was being sold for about £1,000 for 63,000 miles. It had, I think, four previous owners before me. So it had, I think, I don't think people could get on with the gearbox. I think the first owner had it for a few years, as I said before, and obviously after the 3 years warranty, generally cars are sold at 3 years old, and then the second owner took it on. I don't know when it had its accident, possibly around 2008, because there was a stamp, there was actually a sticker on the new reinforcer panel behind the bumper, and the date stamp is 2008. So it could indicate that it was around 2008 that reinforcer was actually sourced. Um, but we never know the true story, to be honest with you. Um, yeah, so I bought that car for £1,000 and I literally just drove it as my daily. However, I always wanted a classic, and I was looking before I bought the Focus. I was close to buying a Rover 600. I think it was a 620 Ti. I can't remember what spec it was, but it had leather seats. It had the 2-litre D series Honda engine, and that was an automatic as well. Strangely, um, they're really nice cars. I think the Rover 600 is one of those cars that I think it was one of the better looking Honda. I'd say the Honda Rovers. I think that's a bit of a controversial term, because Rover put a lot of insight into the styling, the bodywork, the interior, obviously the engines with the K series. There was a lot of design work done on Rover's side. Honda merely provided the platforms, the suspension, um, some of the infrastructure, but there was a lot more Rover to those cars than you think. The Rover 600 was more of a Honda, but it was styled so nicely that actually I think it was more in keeping with what Rover should have been making. The R8 was a very nice car. The R3, not so much. I don't like the R3s. I think they're quite fat and bubbly. I mean, saying that, the Focus was considered quite a bubbly car when it first came out, but I'd never really consider an R3 or a Rover 25, unless a cheap one came my way. They are getting a bit more rarer these days. But the 600, I almost bought that, but my dad was, you want to get a smaller car for your first car. That's too big a car. In hindsight, it maybe was, and that was up for about 1,500. And this was a T-Reg 98, so it would have been about 14, 15 years old at the time. So it would have been a more expensive car. Not necessarily the right choice. And also alongside at the time, I was looking at minis. I always loved minis. I think I've got one. Oh yeah, I've got a book up here. Yep, I'll add that to the collection. I did actually buy this book at the time because I was genuinely, I know it's not the hardback, I was genuinely serious about buying one. And I almost bought a Mini Mayfair 1.3 manual. It had everything going for it, but again, after a discussion with my dad, he was more, you want a small car, but not as old as a Mini. You want something that you could just drive and maybe service lightly, because he knew I was into cars. Um, but he thought that this might have been a step too far, a bit more high maintenance and certainly more expensive. Just get on the road, buy a, a reasonably cheap car that, you know, you're going to probably crash it. And I did. 2 days in, I caused the dent on the driver's wing just here that I've pointed out. I did that dent 2 days in against my parents' brick wall, reversing into the driveway. It's like an uphill driveway. Yeah, so that kind of proved that I shouldn't have gone for something as nice as one of these. If it was in good condition, the one I was looking at, no dents or anything, and you know, maybe some surface rust there as you'd expect, but a decent running. Imagine if I had done that to that. I'd have been mortified. I was mortified enough doing it to this, and a dent-free Focus, and I'd done it in 2 days. That's what it is with being a new driver. But yet those dents are going to be sorted in 2 weeks' time. So yeah, I was going to buy a Mini. I was going to buy a Rover 600, but I ended up buying a Focus. And I think it suited my needs quite nicely. 1.6 automatic. I can be quite a lazy driver, but I don't openly choose automatics, but I'm kind of stuck on them. And learning about how an automatic gearbox works with the planetary gear sets, it's very, very clever. The guy who came up with the planetary gear set idea, I don't know who his name was, but clearly quite a genius, because it's allowed transport for people who may not be able to drive a manual, people who've got the use of one foot. I think there's a lot to be said for automatics. Yes, people don't like them, particularly in the UK. If it's America, if you're looking from America, we're fantastic. I'd love to live in America for that exact reason. But because I always wanted a classic and I had room in my budget for two cars, I'd had probably 8 months of driving this until I came across one of these. And there was a P6. I'd always looked at the P6 as a classic, a proper old school classic. Probably represents Rover. Maybe it's Pinnacle. Maybe the P5 B was the Pinnacle. Maybe. But this one, and I'm going to show on the screen, this was my old car. I don't know where this is these days. Goodness me, that'd be a coincidence if that's your P6 at the moment. Somebody's got it and it's out there and it's been driven a lot of miles. I bought this car in May 2014 and I bought it for £2,000. It needed some O-ring seals replacing in the head because they were leaking down the back of the engine. It's the 4-cylinder, not the V8. The guy who sold it to me had several P6s before me, and he did warn me that after buying this car and owning it for a bit, you'd just want another one if you were to sell it, and that's technically what happened. Cut a long story short, I had this car for a few years, and I did upgrade the leather. I'll just show you a picture of that actually. That is the interior. There are more shots actually of this, but it was immaculate. I re-dyed all the leather on the seats, a sandalwood colour. The car had been mucked around with. I will say that for, you know, when I bought it, this is a 2000 SC automatic, right, with a 3-speed Bob Warner. Which was quite a nice gearbox. I don't know how many miles that had done, because apparently the guy I bought it off bought it around 2007 to be a donor car for his 2000 twin carb. What he found out was this car was so solid, the base unit was so solid, and these can go in and they're very good at hiding their rot. It was so solid that he ended up keeping this car and selling the TC as spares, ridiculously. He did swap a lot of bits. These seats with these ET headrests, and they had the rear headrest as well. Get that up in a picture. I have a lot of photos of this car down the years. A lot of my work that I've done to it. Oh, here we go. That's the one. Come on. Yeah, that's the rear one. So it's just immaculate. What a lovely interior that was, and I was so pleased with the work I did. And I actually brushed it. I didn't use an air spray gun. I actually brush painted it. The door cards were tricky because using leather dye on vinyl is tricky. It can be done, but you have to make sure the vinyl's really stripped and cleaned using alcohol. I did the C pillar trims and B pillar trims. We did an awful lot of work that summer. That was in 2015. I did all that. I love this car. I drove it to and from work. My colleagues loved it. It got attention everywhere. The only thing that annoyed me about P6 ownership, the 4-cylinder ownership, was because I'd drive it along, and people who know these cars would basically come up to me and say, "Oh, it's a lovely P6. Used to have one back in the day. Ah, is it a V8? No, it's not." And I used to get that an awful lot. Now, unfortunately, with P6s, and I'm going to have a little bit of rant about the P6 ownership. Yeah, this is the engine. This is where it's been messed around with. Now, you can see, those of you who know P6s would say that's a 2-litre. It isn't. On the block stamped over here where the mouse is, there's a stamping. It says 2.2. It is a 2.2 single carburetted engine, and it's got the rocker cover of a 2-litre just to make it look the original engine. The original engine bust in around 2006. I don't know what had gone on with it. Lost oil pressure. Possibly the main bearings had gone. They do go. They have to be changed every 50,000 miles. Which I did towards the end of my ownership. Later on I'll explain that. But the owner basically threw that engine out, put this engine in. This was a low mileage engine. He said he'd only done 30 when he put it in. So potentially when I sold the car at 75,000 miles, it probably might have done 40, 35 to 40, which is very low mileage, very little use. But when he put this engine on, the original gearbox decided to go kaput. That's useful, isn't it? Very, very useful. Yeah. Oh, who's this? Yep, me and my work. I'll just take that off. But yeah, let me get a better picture. Now I've got all these on a file. But basically, it was very tidy. I got it really tidy. I got it running on electronic ignition. Unfortunately, in these cars, the ballast resistor that goes to the loom, the coil here, had actually collapsed. There was no power getting to the coil. The idea of a ballast resistor is when you put the car, when you start the car, it throws 12 volts to the starter and to the ignition coil. Then when you turn the key off and it goes to the number, obviously the second setting, the ignition setting, it will change to 9 volts because points will not work with 12 volts. They only work with 9 volts. Okay, so effectively this is a 9-volt coil. But with electronic ignition, you need a 12-volt feed. So I ran a feed from the the wiper relay, the flasher relays. And then I put these AccuSpark ignition modules. AccuSpark ignition modules, people give them a lot of stick, but they are cheap. They're Chinese, but they're all made in China. But I never had an issue. Usually the issue is people don't install them properly. I think I did a video of that if you look further down. I think it's one of the first 2 videos I put on my channel. I should have done more videos, but to be fair, YouTube wasn't really a thing in 2019. It wasn't really a popular thing. But now it certainly is. Everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. But yeah, it had the original distributor and carburetor of the original engine. So it's not HIF, it's a HS6. It ran perfectly. absolutely perfectly, and I quite liked it. A bit of a sleeper being a 2.2, but people think it's a 2 litre. I had to explain that quite a bit, particularly when selling the car. But I ran this until about 2017, where I kind of had enough. I felt that the time was to move on from the car, and I ended up selling it to a guy from Leicester who bought it off me and had it trailered away. So he was going to sell it, run it as a family vehicle, because he was kind of, I think he was in his 50s. So he fancied having a classic from back in the day. His dad had one. Fair enough. That's usually why people buy them, nostalgia. And I basically started focusing more on the Focus. I did a lot more work on the Focus, and I did a lot of work on the Rover, which gave me confidence of working on this car more. And things like simple stuff like brake pads, exhaust. There's a couple of sensors that needed changing, just little things like that, and just did some basic servicing. Not much, but some basic servicing. What happened was, I think I had just this car for about 1.5 years, and I started getting the feeling that I need a classic again. I'm getting a bit bored here, and this is what happens with me. I get bored every few years. I do need something new, as we all do. And I thought I need to start looking at another classic. And the problem is that old saying that the guy I bought the Rover off, if you buy a P6, you'll want another one. And it was always going to be a 4-cylinder, because that's what I was just talking about before. I sidetracked myself a little bit by talking about the engine. The attitude towards the 4-cylinders is pretty poor from what I've seen in the club and outside the club. It generally, I mean, look, I'm not going to be controversial when I say this. This is the blunt, honest truth from my ownership perspective of a 4-cylinder P6. If you don't have a V8, you're in an entirely different club. You've got the owners who've got the 4-cylinders and the V8s. Now, I never really had too much of an issue with, when I'd go to shows, putting my car amongst the P6 group. The club is a very friendly bunch. The P6 club, no, it wasn't the owners club. It was the club. There's two clubs. I think there was a bit of a split years ago, something political, I believe. I'm not sure why you can create political splits within a hobby. It's just a hobby. Somebody might want to enlighten me there. If you're a P6 owner, why is there two clubs and not one? I don't get that. But I always had this outside feeling that the V8, there's so much more knowledge about the engines. They can be rebuilt. There's spare parts from top to bottom. The 4 parts are a bit more difficult. People don't like dealing with the duplex timing chains, changing any of the bearings. They're not seen to be as good an engine, which is rubbish, because it's Rover's own designed engine with a heron head, very small, quite a small profile engine, not as tall an engine as other engines of the time, very advanced, aluminium head with a cast iron block, but aluminium sump and top end, overhead camshaft, very advanced engine for its day, for a design that came out in 1959. Well, essentially the engine was designed in 1959. The V8 was probably, I think, which was a Buick, came out of roughly the same time, but completely different engines. Certainly the V8 is a bit more of a, it's not as efficient in terms of cubic capacity to horsepower and torque, but yeah, each to their own with that. I mean, the V8s sound nice, but does that I mean, P6s are very cheap, and they're too cheap compared to Jags of the day. But really, honestly, do you think that the price difference between a V8 and a 4-cylinder needs to be as much as £3,000? I mean, a good example of a 4-cylinder would probably fetch 3 to 3.5 today. A V8 will be possibly double that, 7. Why is there such a difference? It's just an engine. I really just don't get that, and I would definitely have another 4-cylinder. I wouldn't go for a V8. I probably couldn't afford one anyway. They're far beyond the reach, and it's just an engine. At the end of the day, they are one of the best cars that has ever been produced in this country. ever. Full stop. No discussion about that one. Minis, everybody loves minis, but we know how badly they were made. They were put together with shoestring and, not being funny, but the wiring looms inside them don't give me a bit of confidence that they weren't very well protected from the factory. Um, but they're fun cars to drive. That's their appeal. But they were never built that well. They were designed very nicely, but there were some bits of them that were very cheap. But these were where they are well put together, front to back, electric suspension, unbelievable car. I could go on and on and on about this car, but I ended up buying it back. That's the end of my story. I looked at a P6 not far from me in Birmingham, South Birmingham, Northfield, which is not too far away from Longbridge. It was being sold for just under £2,000. It was a 2200 SC 1974 almond colour, and the bloke who was saying it, I think of the car being away for a few years, but it was MOT exempt, and he said it drove. He took it out for a drive about a couple of months earlier, and it was absolutely fine, just to make sure. It did need more work for my old one, way more work, and I was in two minds about it. But I went to view it, and I said, "All right, I'll come and have a look. No guarantees. I'll come and have a look." The guy got really funny with me when he started pointing out all the good bits, and I was looking at the car thinking, yeah, but the leather interior is ripped. The sills look a bit crusty in places. It does look solid where it needs to be along the bulkhead, which is really important. You can basically finish off a P6 where the bulkhead starts to go, because the suspension pivots off it. It was a bit dirty in the engine bay. It was a bit tired. It definitely needed a complete respray. All the panels needed respraying. And I was a bit and ahhing about that. And the reason I was, in truth, was because I was comparing it with the car that I sold. And the guy got a bit funny with me. He said, I said, okay. At this stage, admittedly, I was half-hearted, but I wanted to drive it because it could have been the difference between me actually buying it. And I genuinely believe that. And I said, are we going to take it for a test drive? And then I can pretty much say whether I want it or not. He said, well, I'm not going to put a battery on it and put fuel in it and take you up for a test drive without you making an offer on it. Well, let's just change that around. I'm not going to make you an offer if we don't go for a test drive. There's no guarantee. I'm not making any guarantees here, okay? I'm not a time waster. I'm not somebody who's taking you for a ride. I've had one of these before. Look at the photos. And I showed him some of these photos on my phone, okay? I'm not lying. I've had one of these before. I know what I'm looking at, okay? But I'm not going to make you an offer without seeing if the car drives and brakes, so I can get a general feel for how it runs. The paintwork's paintwork. If it runs, it runs. I can deal with it. For a price of, we were looking at probably 1,500, which is possibly what he wanted. And at that time, I would have made him an offer on that. But he was being a bit funny with me about that, and I just said, look, you just want way too much, and you're not allowing, you're not going to give me a test drive, so I'm not going to take that gamble. So good luck with it. That's what you've got to be. I'm afraid buying cars and selling cars in the classic world is as stressful as anything you get. Well, there's no such thing as a time waste unless somebody turns up wanting a free test drive without actually wanting to buy the car, which is, I think, why this guy probably thought I was a time waster until I showed him the photos. But anyway, yeah, that's the difficulty. You kind of want to get the best money for your car, but at the same time, you got to be realistic about these things. But the truth is, I wanted my old car back. That is what I wanted. So I got in touch with the guy who I sold it to, and I the only way I could get in touch with him was a letter. So I wrote him a letter saying, in brief, if you consider selling the car, can you please give me first say, and I'll have it back off you. He sent me an email reply to that letter within a week and said, look, fantastic. I was thinking about selling it. I've had to split up from the missus, and the car needs to go. I've got to go back to living at my mum's, and the car has to go. I can't afford it. So I went straight down there in a week later and bought the car back. Now, I'm going to show you a photo. I think I've got one on here. Let me just go and find the photo. I'm just going to have a look around. Right, this is a photo. Right, this is the photo of the car being at this guy's house in Leicester. Okay, put some roof bars on it. Yeah, I didn't like that. I know it's a 70s thing, but I don't like it. And I said, like, you can keep them and sell them. I didn't want them. Everything was pucker. There was a little bit more corrosion along, not that wing, the other wing there. There was a bit of corrosion where it goes, where the guttering is there. And there was a little bit at the back there. It had been sitting. He'd only driven it 500 miles in about a year and a half. I think it had suffered under the car cover. The paintwork had oxidised, but polish, it came back. But the thing from this selling experience that I'm going to show you now is, if we just zoom, I'm just going to zoom in. Can you see the brake master cylinder? It's full of fluid. I question that. Oh, no, I don't want to. Sorry, guys. I've just zoomed. There we go. Sorry, just getting used to my phone. Right. I question that, and basically the only problem he had in the year and a half ownership was apparently the piston in this caliper had started sticking. So he told me, took it out, cleaned it up, put it back in, put new fluid in, and obviously because there's air in the system, he didn't bleed it. I thought, well, how come he didn't bleed it? Well, maybe the bleed nipples might have been seized. Not if you need to, you probably need to get a gauge to do that. And the pedal was a bit floppy, and that's why the pedal was a bit soft. So that explained both the floppy pedal and the brake fluid. So I thought nothing of it, because I was going to get it trailered anyway. Well, about a week after I bought it back, when it came back, this was the first day. This was literally after it come out the tow truck. Okay, it's a nice picture that. It was a bit flat, but it was working. One of the side lights had popped, but that's it really. Nothing to worry about whatsoever. What had happened, and I'll show you the next picture. Now, this is a picture of the brake servo and slave cylinder in my sink. Yes, my missus was not pleased at the sight of that picture. Anyway, what led to that was I immediately wanted to take the car on the drive, and I think it was a bit naive of me to think so. But there was no reason why not. The pedal was a bit floppy, but the brakes worked, and the car was really happy. For a car that had been sitting for a year and a half, it was really happy. Topped it up, did all my checks, off we go. Took it on a seamless drive all the way to Longbridge from where I live. It's about half an hour away. I took it back, refueled, put some super unleaded, Castrol Valve Master, brought it back. When I pulled up in the driveway, I started to lose brakes, and I wondered why. And when I opened the bonnet, there was no fluid in the brake master reservoir. No fluid whatsoever. And then I came to the conclusion of a problem that I possibly had before I sold it to the guy. The brake servo. Unfortunately, there is a seal in the brake servo that fails, and it lets fluid into the servo, and it sits there like a blooming bath. There was a little hole here that I looked in, and it was full of it. Some of it may have been blown into the engine and burnt out the exhaust. You wouldn't notice. Most of it was there. So I knew that was the problem. Okay, so that was a problem that maybe may have arose because the seal's gone. I didn't think much of it. It was obviously one of them things. Maybe that's why the pedal was, one of the reasons the pedal was floppy, apart from air. So what I ended up doing was I ended up taking, obviously, the brake disc apart. So if I can get a picture. Trying to find a good picture. Maybe it's this one. Well, We've got two things. I've got two things to show you, actually. Right. That is a picture. When I started taking it apart, so I took the heat shield off. Okay, the heat shield is held on by two little bolts. Okay. I had to get a blowtorch to take them two bolts off. But anyway, that's quite significant. I'll come back to that in a second. Look at the piston. This is the piston seal. This is the piston. This is the piston that this guy said he took out, cleaned, put back in. That's rusty. He has not cleaned that. And you're telling me he put that back in with that seal being like that. So presumably he knew about that and he didn't say anything. But that's really not the issue. The issue is that the two bolts that I had to take off to access the disc. Hold on. Just come back a bit. Right, this is after I'd done the job. Or was it before? No, it was before. You have to take this heat shield off at the back. It's held on by two bolts, 3/8 bolts, I think. They were seized. You need to take that heat shield off to get the caliper off in order to access the piston. So what I'm saying is, this guy said he took the piston out, cleaned it, put it back in. No, he didn't. There is no evidence that he disturbed this part of the car. Absolutely not. Those bolts were seized. They had not moved in millennia, probably since it was fitted many years ago. Okay, this is the original caliper. Okay, so I got refurbished calipers, new pads, new shims, and all that. I rebuilt the front brakes. That was not a bad problem. That's not a bad job. The reason, this is another shot. There we go. So you can see on that side. Yeah. Oh, that's a good shot. See, that was me putting all the bright works on, all the pins and shims and all that. It's a bit of a faff, but it was a good job. I got it done. The issue I found was, and I'll come back to the picture, the brake servo. Yeah, the brake servo, which I rebuilt. Where's the slave? There we go. Rebuilt it using a new load of parts. Painted it up. There we go. Lovely as new. A new servo spring, that wasn't too expensive. Painted it up. That was rebuilt. Diaphragm was absolutely fine. The spring was fine. Okay. But the issue really was this. Now, he told me a blatant lie. As I say, I've basically proven that that caliper has not been disturbed since millennia because of the bolts. Never. It had not been cleaned. He had not touched it. So why did he tell me some blatant lie about the brake servo being basically working on the piston? He knew what the problem was. He took it to a garage and they diagnosed it as, this is gone. And I'll tell you what, if you want one of these rebuilt like I've done it at home, and these are perfectly rebuildable at home, I'll tell you, you just need some patience. You do not need to take it to a specialist. Specialists, they'll rebore it for you. To be fair, they'll probably rebore it for you for about £250, paint it up, £250, new seals. He didn't want to spend £250 because that's what he knew would cost to rebuild that servo, plus the labour to put it back on and bleed the system. That would have been about £400. Now, if you're a bit short for cash, you wouldn't want to spend £400, and I think that's the reason it was laid up. It was laid up because the servo had gone, the pedal had gone, and he knew there was a problem. He knew it because he topped the servo up, as I showed you in that picture, all the way to the top. And he told me some blatant lie about the piston being seized, so he just took it out. And yeah, this is why you have to be careful about buying classic cars. There are so many unscrupulous people. I just don't know why he just didn't say, look, the reason it's being laid up is because this is gone. Why did he just not tell me the truth? Did he think that I wasn't going to pay as much? I'd have probably given him the same amount because that's what the car was worth, even if with an issue like this, because I knew I could do it. But because he probably thought he put me off, he lied about it. This is something really bad. I mean, lying about brakes is serious, because I could have gone out there and lost all brakes in the middle of the journey, not at the end of the journey when I parked up at my house, but in the middle of the journey. So this is a big thing, guys, that you've really got to watch out for. It was rebuilt. The master cylinder needed doing as well, because the servo, the seals had started to go on that, but it was all rebuilt. Fantastic. And that car is still working today. I did sell the car under a year later. I sold it for £2,500 to someone from Manchester, and they thought that they could sell it on 6 months later, because somebody told me it was up for grabs. 6 months later, with a little bit of paintwork done to the front wing, for about £5,000. And I thought, no. I did give the guy a message. I'm not going to sabotage your sale, okay? But I sold you the car at the going rate. You're selling it at £5,000. No one's going to pay that. That's V8 money. And I think he ended up selling it for free, which was a fair price point for the paintwork he had done. But I don't know where the car is, who he sold it to. I have no idea where this is. I've got to be honest with you, it is a superb example. When I had her, she was a superb example. UON 876M. It is somewhere out there, and she's one of the most solid P6s that you will ever see. Have I got pictures of the seals? I think I had. I had an issue with the ball joint. I did them. This was the extent of the rot, and this was mainly the bottom wing that had rotted out. I'm afraid that's not me with the gaffer tape. That was the guy I bought it off. It had copper brake lines. It had a new bottom arm. Trying to find ball joints. The ball joints are gone. I did respray the inner sills. The sill covers, I had that done. I did some repair on the front wiring. And right, I'll show you this. This is how solid it is. Look at that. I know it's not the best of pictures, but look at it. That is how solid the inner sills are, all the way to the back. Absolutely amazing. You will not get a more solid P6 than that. Would I buy it back tomorrow? I probably would, because I'm an absolute sucker for making U-turns. I did have to repair the dashboard. The dashboard had a small crack in it. That was not like that when I first owned it, but obviously the sun got to it. The Dion rear end was okay. However, I think the elbows needed looking at. I can't remember. No, I think I had. What was that about? I'm trying to remember this now. Oh, I was flushing the radiator out because I was thinking it was there was an overheating issue, but no, it wasn't an overheating issue. No, it wasn't an overheating issue. It was because the timing was slightly out. That's why it needed, the timing was too advanced. It would get to the point where after a journey, I'd turn the key off to turn the engine off, and the engine would just keep running for another 5-10 seconds. It was pretty bad. But I've put there is a YouTube video on there. I mean, that's how smooth it was, but I thought I'd give you a bit of insight into my ownership of this car. I mean, I have taken it to show. That's a nice picture, actually. That, looking at the date stamp, was about 2015. Yeah. Look at the size of the two cars. This is a hatchback, and this is a 60s saloon, essentially, in 70s guise. Unbelievable. Mexico brown, lovely colour. A typical 70s colour. A lot of these have been resprayed red and blue, and I just don't like that. Why people do that, I don't know. I love that colour. It's like a beige Allegro. It's just so 70s. It's untrue. But yeah, and I've had the Focus to this day, and I've done probably a semi-restoration on it, to be honest with you. I knew that the Rover needed to go because the Focus was getting to a point where... yeah, it was getting to a point where, quite frankly, it was... There is a video here. This is not on YouTube. I'll play it. Oh dear. And this is where I had to choke on too much, and yeah, I haven't put this as a video, but fun days where you could just gas out your neighbours. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Fantastic. I'm going to leave it there, guys, but basically that's where we are at today. The Focus has got to an age now where I would like to preserve it as a modern day classic. I will be getting another car in the next 6 months, so hopefully if you keep following me on this channel, I may have another car. It won't be a Mini. I don't think it'll be one of these, because these also need as much money as this does these days, but you never know, and I will not say no if the right one came around, particularly a 4-cylinder. I think I'm a sucker for these, but I'm looking more on the lines of maybe a Rover 600. Maybe not. Maybe they've gone into too much of a niche category. They're not worth much. They should be worth more, but they're not worth much, possibly because the parts are a bit of a tricky one and not desirable. But I need something that is younger than this car, preferably, or around the same age, that I'm not going to care about as much, that I'm going to enjoy driving, but don't get too attached. Possibly a Rover 25 then, or a Rover 45. I am considering a Rover 45, to be honest. I think the Rover 75s are very BMW for my take, and they are very different to the 2545. You can tell the difference between the Honda aspect and the BMW influence between the two sets of cars. So I just thought I'd do a 41-minute ramble. You probably won't have watched this at all, but I'm hoping that if you are into Rover P6s, you would have listened a little bit and taken interest. I don't know where my old car is. I'd love to know. I'd love to know if anybody owns it, because according to the MOT history, it's MOT'd, and it has done a further 5,000 miles since I sold it, which means that the work I did on the mains crank bearings successful, unless the engine blew up because I didn't do it right and they've had to replace it. But we'll gloss over that. I'm hoping that it isn't. Fascinating. I'll see you guys soon.